when CC does get kind of, I hate using the word bullied, but like people are fucking rough with her. Like there's no other way around it. Does that like fuck with you guys as a team, or is that just an incident that becomes a much bigger deal on the internet than it does during real time?
There's a moment from a WNBA game in late June 2026 that a lot of people still can't wrap their heads around. Not because of some jaw-dropping comeback, not because of a buzzer beater that nobody saw coming, but because a player got hit in the throat with a closed fist in the middle of a professional basketball game in front of thousands of fans, with cameras rolling on every angle. And nobody called a thing. The refs on the court missed it. The officials watching from the booth let it go. The game kept moving like nothing happened at all. And Caitlin Clark, the biggest name in women's basketball right now, walked off the floor hurt, while the league acted like it was just another Tuesday night. But what made that moment explode wasn't just the foul itself. It was everything that came attached to it. The viral meme that broke the internet. The commemorative poster that erased her completely. The commissioner's silence that lasted days longer than it ever should have. And a teammate who stood in front of a referee for 22 seconds and never said a single word. All of it happened within the same week. And once you start connecting the dots, this story goes a lot deeper than one missed call. It was June 24, 2026. Indiana Fever versus the Phoenix Mercury. A game that already had tension baked into it before tip-off, because these two teams had built up the kind of history that makes every possession feel like a live wire. Both sides knew what they were walking into. The crowd knew it. The commentators knew it. But nobody could have predicted what was actually about to happen on that floor.
None of our team saw it happen, because I promise you, if we would have seen that happen, we would have had her back. Unfortunately, This type of shit happens every single game to her.
During a loose ball scramble midway through the contest, Alyssa Thomas kneed Clark in the thigh and then put her closed fist directly into Clark's neck. Not a shove during a rebound, not a stray elbow in traffic. A fist, deliberately driven into the throat of the most talked-about player in the entire sport. And what came next is what turned this from a controversial foul into a full-blown national story. Nothing happened. Not a whistle from any of the officials standing on that floor. Not a review from the booth. Not even a stoppage for a jump ball or a timeout to let anyone catch their breath and take a second look. The game kept going like it was any other play in any other game on any other night. The refs, who were literally positioned courtside to catch exactly that kind of contact, either didn't see it, or made a decision in real time that it wasn't worth addressing. And either of those options is a serious problem. Clark, being the competitor she is, stayed in the game for a stretch after it happened. She didn't immediately collapse or make a scene. She kept playing, but she was clearly not right. She later left the contest, a 111-9 Fever loss, due to a back injury suffered during that same physical exchange. Indiana lost by 2 points. Clark was hurt. And the play that set all of it in motion had still gone completely unaddressed by everyone in a position to do something about it. It wasn't until the league went back and reviewed the footage after the fact that any form of discipline came into the picture. The WNBA upgraded the play to a flagrant 2 and suspended Thomas for 1 game, served against the Toronto Tempo, for recklessly making contact with her fist to the throat area of Clark. 1 game. That's the price for a closed fist strike to the throat in a professional basketball league. 1 game, served, done. And the only reason even that much happened is because someone in the league office hit play on the replay after the final buzzer had already sounded. The officials who were standing right there on the court, paid specifically to catch things like this in real time, let it walk entirely. Without the video review process running after the fact, Thomas wouldn't have faced any consequences at all. That's a massive failure, and the response from the people running the league made it worse. There was no emergency statement released that night, no press conference the next morning, no public acknowledgement from the commissioner's office that something had gone badly wrong on that floor. The narrative was handed over entirely to social media, which did exactly what social media always does when a vacuum opens up. It filled it, loudly and completely. Clips of the play circulated millions of times within 48 hours. Sports commentators who had never covered a WNBA game were suddenly weighing in with full takes. Mainstream outlets picked up the story and ran with it. People who hadn't thought about the WNBA in years were watching the slow-motion replay on a loop, trying to figure out how something so obvious could go completely uncalled. Some tried to frame it as just hard-nosed physical basketball being misrepresented, but the footage doesn't leave much space for reframing. A fist to the throat is a fist to the throat, regardless of what kind of game is being played around it. The Fever coaching staff made their feelings clear immediately. Fever coach Stephanie White called the officiating situation surrounding Clark absolutely unacceptable. Not frustrated, not disappointed, unacceptable. WNBA legend Lisa Leslie echoed the sentiment publicly, saying the league has to do better. A coaching staff furious, Hall of Famers agreeing. Millions of people watching the same few seconds of video on repeat. And still, the league's top decision-maker had absolutely nothing to say. As damaging as this one play was on its own, what makes the story genuinely alarming is that it didn't happen in isolation. Because this isn't a one-time thing, not even slightly. And the numbers that back that up are something the league should be losing sleep over. If the throat incident was the only time something like this had happened to Clark, it would still be a problem worth talking about. One missed call of that magnitude is one too many. But the reason this story resonated far beyond the usual sports news cycle is because it isn't isolated. It's part of something that's been building since Clark stepped onto a WNBA floor for the first time in 2024. Despite missing a significant portion of her sophomore season, Clark has been on the receiving end of 9 flagrant fouls since entering the league, the most toward any player in that same time frame. 9 flagrant fouls, in a league where most players go entire careers without accumulating that number. And when you look at how those fouls were handled, the picture gets even more uncomfortable. Only 2 of them were called flagrant fouls in the actual moment they happened. 3 were retroactively upgraded after video review, including 2 that were bumped all the way up to flagrant 2s, and 1 that came with a suspension attached. Twice in the last 25 games Clark has played in, the league has looked at the footage after the fact and essentially admitted that she was hit hard enough to warrant an ejection, and nobody caught it in real time. That's not a streak of bad luck. That's a systemic pattern. The incident started early. Chennedy Carter's hip check during Clark's rookie season became one of the most discussed plays of the entire 2024 WNBA year. Carter shoved Clark from behind while Clark was standing still, away from the ball, not doing anything remotely threatening. No call. The play went viral within hours and sparked the first major wave of conversation about whether Clark was being physically targeted in ways that were going unchecked by officials and the league office. Then came more incidents: elbows to the face, knees to the legs, pushes that looked deliberate rather than accidental. Each one followed the same pattern: a physical play on Clark, a missed or downgraded call on the floor, public outrage online, and then, occasionally, a retroactive upgrade from the league office after the footage had already made the rounds. By the time the Alyssa Thomas fist-to-the-throat incident happened, this was already the 9th time the conversation had been forced into the spotlight. Except this time, the contact was so blatant, and the league's initial non-response so glaring, that the story broke through in a way none of the previous incidents had managed to do. What makes the pattern particularly hard to ignore is the specificity of it. These aren't random hard fouls distributed evenly across the roster. They're concentrated on one player, and that player happens to be the one driving ticket sales, television ratings, and national media coverage in ways the WNBA hasn't seen in over a decade. Supporters of the league argue that Clark's visibility naturally draws more attention to every physical play that involves her, and that other players absorb the same contact without it becoming national news. That's a reasonable point in isolation, but it doesn't hold up against the data. 9 flagrant fouls, the most in the league in that period, that's not a perception issue. That's a reality that the numbers confirm, regardless of how much visibility Clark has. There have also been reports and conversations across the league suggesting that some players have openly discussed making things physically difficult for Clark as a deliberate strategy. Nothing has been confirmed in any official capacity, so it's fair to frame it as speculation circling the league rather than established fact. But the speculation exists, it's being talked about widely, and the incidents on the court give it enough visual support that the conversation isn't going away anytime soon. The hit that sparked this latest wave of coverage evolved into a much larger debate, one that reached mainstream daytime television, sports radio across the country, and even drew political commentary from figures well outside the basketball world. Because when a league's most valuable player is being flagrant fouled at a rate 9 times higher than her counterparts, and the officials are consistently missing those fouls in real time, the conversation stops being about basketball and starts being about accountability. Who's responsible for protecting players on that floor? Who answers for the calls that aren't made? And who speaks up when the pattern becomes undeniable? Turns out, one person had already decided she was done waiting for answers. She'd been ready to speak up long before any of this made national news, and she did it without saying a word. If you spent any time on social media in the last week of June 2026, you already know the image. A basketball player, arms at her sides, one finger extended, eyes locked on a referee with the kind of unblinking focus that made millions of people stop scrolling and watch the clip again from the beginning. Sophie Cunningham, Indiana Fever forward, in the middle of a game that was already boiling over, just standing there and pointing. Not yelling, not gesturing wildly, not getting in anyone's face, just pointing, calmly, relentlessly, for 22 full seconds, and the internet went absolutely insane over it. The moment originated from the June 22nd matchup between the Fever and the Phoenix Mercury, just 2 days before the throat incident would overtake everything. During the game, Clark received a technical foul following a physical exchange with DeWanna Bonner. Cunningham walked over to the referee to ask the obvious question: if Clark got a technical, why didn't Bonner? It was a legitimate dispute, the kind players make dozens of times every game, but Cunningham didn't just ask and walk away. When the referee dismissed her, she planted her feet and pointed, and she didn't stop. For roughly 22 seconds, she stood her ground with that single extended finger directed at the official, never breaking eye contact, never raising her voice, never giving them anything they could use to run her. A Fever staff member eventually walked her away from the situation, but the damage, or rather the magic, was already done. The clip exploded, tens of millions of views across platforms within days of hitting the internet. Shirts were printed, GIFs flooded group chats. The Sophie Cunningham pointing moment became one of the defining sports clips of 2026, the kind that gets referenced and reposted for years. What made it hit even harder was the backstory that most people watching didn't know at the time. Cunningham and Bonner weren't strangers meeting in a rival uniform for the first time. They were former teammates. Bonner had been on the Fever roster earlier in the 2025 season, where she and Cunningham played together for 9 games before Bonner was released on June 25, 2025. Bonner signed with the Mercury shortly after, turning what had been a brief partnership into a crosstown rivalry with personal edges. So that 22-second stare wasn't just a veteran player challenging a call, it was history on the floor. Former teammates, competing interests, and an internet audience of millions all colliding in real time. And Cunningham handled it without saying a single word, which made it more devastating than any trash talk could have been. The meme timing was also significant because of what was happening in the broader conversation around the Fever. Clark had been taking hits all season, the league had been inconsistent with its responses, fans had been building frustration for weeks, and then Cunningham walks into the frame and, without any planning, delivers the most internet-ready moment of the entire WNBA season. It crystallized everything people had been feeling, the exhaustion with missed calls, the sense that someone on the Fever needed to stand up and say something, the need for accountability to look like something tangible rather than just a statement released 24 hours after the game. Cunningham provided all of that without a single syllable. The Fever social media team capitalized immediately, posting the meme alongside a link to all-star voting in a move that was praised by fans as one of the smarter bits of team marketing of the year. Even Clark, who rarely engages with this kind of cultural moment publicly, acknowledged the clip with quiet amusement. Cunningham herself played it cool on her podcast, saying that what made it work was exactly the silence. No words gave the referee no ammunition, just a finger and a face that said everything. The shirts that started showing up in the stands at Fever games after the clip went viral were particularly telling. Fans showed up wearing images of the pointing moment, wearing shirts with variations of the gesture on them, carrying signs that nodded to the meme. The energy in the arena around Cunningham shifted overnight. She went from being a respected veteran to becoming something of a folk hero for the Fever fanbase. But that same fanbase was about to find out that the meme was only the beginning of what Cunningham had to say. Because when the microphone was in front of her, she went a lot further than a pointed finger. Sophie Cunningham didn't show up to her podcast looking to stir things up. She showed up because that's what she does. She talks basketball, she gives real opinions, and she doesn't particularly care if those opinions land her in trouble with the league office. And this episode was no different, except that the topic was a lot heavier than usual, and the clip was circling the internet before the episode had even finished uploading. Cunningham opened up immediately about what she hadn't seen in real time during the game. She explained that nobody on the Fever caught the throat incident while it was actually happening on the floor. If they had, she said plainly, things would have gone differently. She made it clear that this wasn't a case of teammates looking away or staying neutral to avoid a situation. They simply didn't see it live, which, given the chaotic nature of a loose ball scramble, is entirely plausible. But that wasn't the part of what she said that took off. That came next. Cunningham went straight at the pattern. She didn't frame it carefully or soften the language to protect herself from a fine. She said the quiet part out loud. Other teams are targeting Clark, and the league and the refs do nothing to protect her. She described watching the video after the game, the knee to the thigh, the fist to the throat, and said that if any of that had been done to a Fever teammate, the team would have been pissed. The word she used was targeting. Deliberately. Specifically. She wasn't suggesting it was hard basketball or aggressive defense. She was saying, on record with her name attached, that players were going after Clark on purpose, and that the system designed to prevent that was failing completely. For context on how significant that is, Cunningham has previously been fined by the league for comments made on her podcast, and for a TikTok video she posted. She knows that speaking publicly about officiating and league conduct comes with a financial cost. She said it anyway, which tells you everything about how strongly she felt. She wasn't alone in that position either. Fever head coach Stephanie White came out of the game with her own public statement, calling the officiating surrounding Clark absolutely unacceptable. Not a measured response. Not a we'll look at the tape and see what we think. Unacceptable. One word that drew a hard line in the sand. And then WNBA legend Lisa Leslie added her voice to the pile, saying the league has to do better, a phrase that was picked up and run across every sports platform within hours of her saying it. When you have an active player putting her wallet on the line to say something publicly, a head coach calling the situation unacceptable, and a Hall of Famer co-signing the criticism from the outside, the argument that this is just noise from frustrated people becomes very hard to sustain. This was a coordinated, cross-generational rejection of the way the league had handled Clark's physical safety. What's particularly interesting about all of it is what Cunningham didn't do. She didn't call out individual players by name beyond the incident itself. She didn't make sweeping accusations about motives without backing them up. She laid out what she saw on the video, explained what she believes is happening systematically, and drew a direct line between the targeting and the league's failure to address it. That structure actually makes the argument harder to dismiss than a pure emotional rant would have been. She was angry, but she was organized about it. The kind of organized that comes from watching the same situation play out 9 times and waiting for someone in charge to notice. There have also been rumors circulating, unverified but persistent, that conversations have happened in WNBA circles about making Clark uncomfortable through physical play as a deliberate game planning strategy. Reports claim that these discussions have moved beyond typical defensive scheming into something more personal, though nothing has been officially confirmed, and it remains squarely in speculation territory. What can be said with certainty is that the pattern of flagrant fouls, the missed calls, and the post-game upgrades all exist on the record regardless of what motivated them. And while all of this was exploding in real time, the league decided to celebrate its anniversary in the worst possible way. Timing in public relations is everything. When things are already on fire, the last thing you want to do is show up with more fuel, which makes what the WNBA did during the exact same week that all of this was unfolding one of the more inexplicable decisions the league has made in recent memory. To commemorate its 30th anniversary, the WNBA released a limited edition poster graphic featuring 30 players across the league's history. Available for $29.99 through the WNBA's official online store. 30 players, 30 years, one big celebratory moment to remind everyone how far the league had come. Except the most recognizable player in over a decade, the one driving the highest ratings, the biggest crowds, and the most cultural conversation the WNBA had seen in years, was not on it. Caitlin Clark was left off the 30th anniversary poster entirely. And the league dropped it in the same week she got hit in the throat and walked off the floor with a back injury. The internet's reaction was about as measured as you'd expect. Only 30 players made the graphic, and the omissions weren't limited to Clark. Other WNBA legends were also left off, including Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, and Candace Parker, 3 names that belong in any serious conversation about the greatest players in league history. So the argument that it was some deliberate snub of Clark specifically falls apart quickly when you realize multiple all-time greats were also missing. But here's what made it sting differently for Clark's situation. Her absence landed in the middle of a week when the conversation was already entirely about whether the league values and protects her. Context matters. A licensing technicality reads very differently in a week of relative quiet versus a week when a player just took a fist to the throat and the commissioner hadn't said a single word about it. There is a legitimate explanation for why Clark wasn't included. Her 8-year, $28 million Nike contract includes provisions that prevent third-party brands like Wincraft, the vendor behind the poster, from using her likeness in their merchandise. It's a standard exclusivity clause. It has nothing to do with how the league feels about her. It's a legal agreement between Clark, her team, and Nike that limits where her image can appear commercially. The league didn't choose to leave her off. They were contractually restricted from putting her on. For fans who understand how endorsement deals and licensing agreements work, that explanation makes complete sense. But the average viewer watching this story unfold didn't know any of that context, and in the absence of explanation, people filled the vacuum with the narrative that felt most consistent with everything else happening that week. Why is the league leaving out its biggest star? Why is she getting hit on the court and ignored on the anniversary poster? Why does it feel like the people in charge are pretending she doesn't exist? The fan response was immediate and creative. Dozens of edited versions of the poster started circulating online within hours. Fixed it versions with Clark front and center, often replacing whichever player had been chosen to represent the Fever. That player, by the way, was Sophie Cunningham. The same Sophie Cunningham who was already all over the internet for the pointing meme. The same Sophie Cunningham who had just gone on record defending Clark against the league's officiating failures. She was on the anniversary poster, and Clark wasn't. Cunningham herself addressed it on her podcast and couldn't hide the awkwardness of the situation, openly saying the spot should have gone to Clark, or to Kelsey Mitchell, or to Aaliyah Boston, not to her. It was a rare moment of a player publicly declining the credit given to them, because the credit felt wrong given the circumstances. The fan-made posters, the social media mockery, and the media coverage all reinforced the same uncomfortable image, a league sitting on its biggest commercial asset and repeatedly, whether through licensing restrictions or missed calls or post-incident silence, giving the impression that the asset doesn't matter. Real or not, that impression was spreading fast. And while all of this was piling up in the public eye, the person with the most power and responsibility to address any of it was nowhere to be found. There's a version of how WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert handles this week where she comes out looking like a competent leader. She releases a statement the morning after the Thomas incident acknowledging the missed call, confirms that a review is underway, and makes clear that player safety is the league's top priority. She doesn't throw anyone under the bus. She doesn't overreact. She just addresses it directly and moves forward. That version didn't happen. Instead, in the days immediately following the most talked-about play of the 2026 WNBA season, Engelbert went quiet. No press conference, no public statement, no acknowledgement from the commissioner's office that something had gone badly wrong on the floor and that the league was taking it seriously. The silence lasted long enough that it became its own story, not a footnote, not a minor criticism, but an actual part of the narrative that commentators were directly addressing on air. One analyst put it bluntly in a widely shared segment. As other issues have popped up, be it the officiating, be it this new dynamic and element that is Caitlin Clark, she has failed. Cathy Engelbert being silent is not going to work. That kind of direct criticism of a sitting commissioner from a credible sports voice is notable on its own. But what made it more damaging is that it was accurate, and the audience watching knew it was accurate because they had spent multiple days looking for a statement and finding nothing. Leadership silence during a crisis doesn't neutralize the crisis. It amplifies it because it signals either an inability to respond or a deliberate choice not to, and neither of those reads well for the person in charge. When Engelbert did eventually break her silence, the timing and content made things worse rather than better. Her public response came after Alyssa Thomas, the player who had been suspended for the throat strike, went public with her own frustrations about the online abuse and death threats she was receiving in the aftermath. Thomas was not wrong to speak up about that. The harassment directed at athletes who become the center of social media firestorms is a legitimate issue and a legitimate harm, and it deserved to be acknowledged. But what critics noticed was the sequence. Engelbert found her voice to validate Thomas's grievances and condemn the harassment, while the statement addressing the actual incident and Clark's physical safety arrived late, received less prominent placement, and felt considerably less urgent in its framing. The league office showed it was more interested in managing the optics around Thomas's situation than in centering the player who had taken a fist to the throat and walked off the floor hurt. Engelbert has faced versions of this criticism before. Hard fouls on Clark are routinely downgraded or missed entirely in the moment, and meaningful discipline tends to arrive only after public outrage has already built to a level where doing nothing becomes more embarrassing than doing something. The retroactive flagrant 2 upgrade on the Thomas play is a perfect example of that cycle. The league acknowledged after the fact that the contact warranted an ejection, which means the officials failed in real time, which means the process didn't protect Clark when it actually mattered. The punishment came 24 hours too late to change what happened on the floor. In an unusual moment of candor that was widely circulated, Engelbert herself acknowledged the problem, stating that the league is misaligned currently with what our stakeholders want from officiating, and that change is needed to serve the WNBA to the level of excellence that is not currently being met. Misaligned. That word was immediately seized on by critics who noted that it significantly undersells what has actually been happening. The league isn't slightly off in its approach to officiating. It has repeatedly, over the course of 2 full seasons, failed to protect its most valuable player in real time and addressed the failures only when external pressure made silence impossible. There are people who argue that Engelbert's tenure has produced real, measurable growth for the league, expansion teams, record attendance figures, larger media deals, and that context matters when evaluating her leadership. Those facts are accurate and worth acknowledging, but growth at the organizational level doesn't resolve the specific, repeated, documented failure to protect players on the floor. Both things can be true at the same time. The league is bigger than it's ever been, and it is handling its biggest star with a level of carelessness that could undo the progress if left unaddressed. And eventually, Clark herself decided she was done letting other people speak on her behalf. Caitlin Clark doesn't do drama for the sake of drama. Anyone who has followed her career knows that she tends to keep her public comments measured, her focus on the game itself, and her frustration private until she has something specific and direct to say, which is exactly why it meant something when she stepped in front of microphones after the Thomas incident and didn't deflect. Clark said plainly, "I did think it was a flagrant foul and our reffing just needs to be better." No hedging. No diplomatic softening. No, I'll leave it to the league to figure out. A clear, first-person statement that the officiating on that floor did not meet the standard it needed to meet. For someone with Clark's public profile, someone who knows that every word gets magnified across thousands of media outlets within minutes, making that statement directly and without qualifiers is a deliberate choice. She wanted it on the record. But she didn't stop there. In a broader interview in the days following the incident, Clark challenged WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert and the league to better protect players on and off the court. She acknowledged the social media environment surrounding everything that happens in her games and said that the constant online discourse takes away from what the sport should be about. She wasn't asking for less scrutiny on the physical play. She was asking for the people with the power to address that physical play to actually use it, so that the conversation can be about basketball rather than about whether players are safe on the floor. The subtext of what she was saying is significant. Clark isn't just the most visible player in the league. She's become a cultural inflection point, a figure whose games draw viewership numbers and arena crowds that force the sport into mainstream conversations it hasn't been part of in over a decade. When she says the discourse is taking away from the game, she's speaking from a position of unique weight, because she understands better than almost anyone how much attention is riding on every moment of every game she plays in. The response to Clark's comments from across the sports world reinforced just how far this conversation had spread. Talk shows that don't normally cover women's basketball were running full segments on the officiating situation. Politicians who had previously amplified Clark-related controversies during her college career were back in the conversation. International sports media picked up the story. The clip of the fist-to-the-throat play was being shown in countries where the WNBA doesn't even have dedicated broadcast coverage. For a league that has spent years trying to grow its global footprint, that kind of international attention landing on a player safety failure is a genuinely difficult thing to navigate. The league needs the conversation, but not that conversation. There's a version of this where the coverage is about Clark's brilliance, the Fever's chemistry, the rising star power across multiple rosters. Instead, the dominant headline for the better part of a week was about whether anyone in charge was protecting the player carrying the league forward. It's also worth acknowledging what's true on the other side of this. Supporters of the league's leadership point to things that are genuinely impressive under Engelbert's tenure: record attendance across multiple markets, significant new media rights deals, expansion franchises in new cities creating more opportunities for players, a level of mainstream coverage that was simply not present 5 or 6 years ago. Those are real developments, and they didn't happen accidentally. Building a professional sports league into cultural relevance takes sustained effort and strategy, and the WNBA has made measurable progress by meaningful metrics. But the problem with leading a growth story and simultaneously mishandling the biggest individual controversy at the center of that growth is that you can't separate them in the public conversation. Every misstep on the Clark situation gets weighed against the progress elsewhere, and increasingly, people watching from the outside are asking whether the people in charge understand what they have and whether they're serious about protecting it. Because the player delivering all of that growth, all of those ratings, all of that new attention, she just walked off a floor with a back injury after taking a fist to the throat, and the whole world was watching to see what would happen next. Here's the thing about all of this that gets lost in the noise of any single incident or any single bad week. This isn't really about one foul or one poster or one commissioner who went quiet when she should have spoken up. It's about whether a league that is finally breaking through to the mainstream has the infrastructure and the will to protect what's driving that breakthrough. The WNBA is sitting on something genuinely rare in professional sports, a player who has shifted the cultural conversation around an entire league overnight, drawing in audiences that weren't there before and keeping them there. That doesn't happen on its own. That's a once-in-a-generation thing. And right now, the league is responding to it with retroactive suspensions, delayed statements, licensing technicalities, and a pattern of missed calls that the data makes impossible to dismiss. Sophie Cunningham stood in front of a referee for 22 seconds and said everything without saying a word. Clark went on record and asked directly for better. Coaches, legends, and fans said the same thing from every direction. The league heard all of it. The real question is whether hearing it and doing something about it are the same thing, because the answer to that question is going to define what the next chapter of this league actually looks like.